Have you ever had a handshake that was just the worst? Like maybe it was cold or limp or wet for some reason? Well, if you live long enough here in America and have met fellow human beings, you've probably experienced a handshake. Handshakes can be seen in all different shapes and sizes and in all different forms and situations. But due to recent events, the handshake is rapidly declining. So first off, let's grasp onto what a handshake really is. Second, we'll reach back to the history of the handshake. And finally, put our finger on why we need the handshake, but also why we should be careful. So first off, what is a handshake? Well, I don't think I have to explain a handshake in its simplest form, but just in case you haven't seen another human in the past year, a handshake is simply defined as two hands coming together as a peaceful sign of greeting, agreement, or farewell. But there are a few different types of handshakes that can be used in different situations to convey different things. But just in case you're unfamiliar with the different types, let me educatively demonstrate and explain a few of them. But since you can't shake your own hand, I purchased one and it's a lot smaller than it looked like on the Amazon description, but it'll do. So the first handshake is the classic. This is the tried and true church to soccer tryout shake. And though it's seen a huge decline in recent years, the classic goes all the way back to ancient Rome and is still the most commonly thought of when one mentions the handshake. There are a few different variations that can be seen on this particular handshake, such as grabbing the forearm in order to express dominance or something, or using two hands to make the other person as uncomfortable as physically possible. Gloves are recommended if you'd like to try one of these today. Our second handshake is the dap. This is a more recent development, originating from black soldiers in the Vietnam War. There's so much more to the dap than I have time to talk about today, but it is one of the truest forms of respect in informal situations and especially in black culture. Careful not to overuse it. Our third handshake, it pushes the definition a bit. I guess it's more of an honorable mention, but it's the fist bump. I mention it because it's becoming exceedingly more popular in today's society, especially because of the ability to not touch all the parts of your hand you use to touch your face and blow your nose. And the handshake originates from boxers bumping gloves before a match and was normalized as an alternative to the handshake. Expect to see this form of greeting a lot more in the not so distant future. So at this point, you're probably wondering, where in the world did the handshake come from? Why do we vigorously grab each other's hands and move them up and down? Well, there's one main idea that all throughout history the handshake has carried, and that's the idea of peace. Megan Garber, writer for The Atlantic, tells us that handshakes historically have been invoked as a sign of easy equality, as a hope for a friction-free world. Its mathematical simplicity, hand to hand, flesh to flesh, implies the dissolution of the differences that may otherwise separate one person from another. So with this idea in mind, there are two basic periods of the handshake. First off, we have the origin. According to National Geographic, the handshake goes back over 3,000 years ago to ancient Mediterranean culture, where ancient carvings depict soldiers, kings, and even gods shaking hands. But this was a form of peace or agreement, and not as a simple hello or goodbye as we see it today. On the other hand, men in ancient Rome would grab each other's forearms in order to make sure that the other person was not hiding a weapon up their sleeve. And the shake part was simply to shake free any loose hidden weapons. Sounds like a lack of trust to me, but it was one of the truest forms of equality and sign of peace between two people. But in this period of time, the handshake was only done between friends and was seen as an inappropriate thing to do between strangers. That obviously has changed, however. And that brings us to the second period of the handshake, the rise of the modern shake. How did we start shaking hands as a greeting? Well, this is usually accredited to the Quakers, who, according to mentalfloss.com, in order to show equality with one another, would shake hands as a form of hello or goodbye. This was really uncommon at the time, as in Europe, most people just used the bow for those of higher social standing, or the kiss on the cheek, which was for just friends. If only. In Europe, the handshake was seen as a vile English tradition, and because of this unpopularity in Europe, the handshake made its way to the Americas with the Quakers, and soon was being used by colonists for both business and informal uses. It still took a while, though, for the handshake to reach all areas of American life. President George Washington preferred to bow instead of shaking hands. But Thomas Jefferson was the first president to start shaking hands with not only his fellow politicians, but with civilians as well. This set a precedent of handshaking in political office. And up until this year, a refusal to shake hands in politics is seen as a great disrespect. So that brings us to the handshake as we see it today, or like a year ago today, as a simple greeting between both friends and even strangers. But the handshake is said by many people to soon lose its grip on American culture forever. So what's happening to the handshake? Why is it dangerous? Why do we need it? I mean, other cultures seem to get away with not touching each other just fine, such as bowing in Asian cultures. So why here in America do we get so up in arms about the need to touch each other? Why are handshakes such a defended topic to some people? I mean, it's sort of nasty. You don't know where that person's hands have been. They could have, I don't know, licked every inch of that thing, and you're touching all of it. But that brings up another important point that the handshake has had all throughout history, and that's the idea of trust. Behavioral scientist Val Curtis of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine says that one possible reason that handshakes and kisses on the cheeks have endured as greetings is because it shows that the other person is trusted enough to risk sharing germs with. Now, obviously, if you see someone lick their hand, it would be understandable to not want to then shake it. But trust is sort of lacking in today's culture. Maybe for good reason, but the handshake is one of the lasting relics of common trust here in America. Now, don't worry, I didn't forget about the global pandemic that's plagued our world for more than half a year now. Obviously, shaking hands in today's climate is maybe not the wisest thing to do for both the health of you and for others. But to say that the handshake will never come back, I feel like is a bit of a reach. Physical greetings such as kisses on the cheeks and handshakes have been put on pause before due to public health concerns such as the swine flu in the early 1900s, or even as recent as 2009. But with everything in mind, we should remember where the handshake came from, as a sign of peace and equality and trust between two people. Above all, we should greet each other in a way that would be healthiest for the beneficial of both those we care about and yourself. So today we've gone over what a handshake is, including a few different types. We've explored the history of the handshake and touched on the implications of the handshake, or lack thereof, in today's culture. I'm sure we've all had some awful handshakes in our lives. This past year, I for one have really missed the familiarity the handshake brings to our dog-eat-dog, every man for himself world.